She had learned to make herself small. Not just her body, though she'd gotten good at that too, folding into doorways, into the shadow side of buildings, into the gap between what people noticed and what they chose to ignore. She'd learned to make her hope small, small enough to hide, small enough that when it died, nobody would hear it go. By the time I found her behind my feed barn on the coldest night of that year, there wasn't much of her left to make smaller. She was down to the last thing a person owns after everything else is gone, the thing you can't sell, can't trade, can't give away no matter how hungry you get. Her shame. I've kept a ledger my whole life. Every debt, every favor, every dollar in and out, I write it all down, because my daddy always said a man who can't account for himself has already lost the argument. But there's no column in any ledger for what I owed that woman by the time spring came. No line for what she gave me. No number that squares it. This is the story of the winter. A stranger taught me that the people we're most ashamed to become are usually the ones who were braver than us all along. Stay with me, because what she did that March, the choice she made when she had every reason in the world to run, I've spent 30 years trying to earn the right to tell it. The dog told me first. That's how it usually went out at the Corliss place, the animals knowing things a good half hour before I did. Old Boone had been a working dog once, before his hips gave out and he turned into a porch philosopher, and by that last winter he mostly saved his barking for things that mattered. So when he started up near midnight, low and steady, not the yapping he did at coyotes but that flat serious note he used for people, I put down my pencil and listened. I'd been at the kitchen table doing what I always did after supper, adding columns. The lamp guttered a little in the draft that came under the door no matter how much I stuffed the gap with rags. December of that year had come in mean, the kind of cold that doesn't blow, it just sits, pressing down on the whole valley like a flat iron. I'd already lost 2 head to it. The ledger said as much in my own cramped hand. Nav 30 heifer, the roan one, froze in the north draw, total loss. You learn to write those lines plain. Sentiment doesn't balance the books. Boone barked again. I told myself it was nothing. A raccoon in the feed. The wind moving a loose board. I told myself a lot of things in those days, most of them ways to keep from getting up out of a warm chair. I was 41 years old that winter and I'd been alone for 6 of them, and a man who lives alone gets good at talking himself out of trouble because there's nobody else to talk him into it. But Boone wouldn't quit, and a dog that won't quit is telling you something whether you want to hear it or not. So I pulled on my coat, the heavy canvas one, stiff with old cold, and I took the lantern down off its nail, and I went out into a night so still I could hear the ice forming. That's not a figure of speech. On the worst nights out there you could hear it, a faint ticking crackle as the world set up hard as glass. My breath came out in a fog that hung there a second before it fell. The feed barn sat 40 yards off the house, and I could see Boone at the far corner of it, stiff-legged, rough up, aimed at something in the black behind. I called him off soft. He came, but reluctant, and he kept looking back. "All right," I said, "all right, let's see." I raised the lantern and rounded the corner, and there she was. She'd wedged herself into the angle where the barn met the lean-to, up out of the wind, into the little pocket of warmth that leaked through the boards off the animals inside. She had a coat that had been good once, you could tell, a wool coat with a velvet collar gone bald in patches, the kind of thing a woman wears to church in a life she doesn't have any more. She'd pulled it over her knees. She had a carpet bag clutched against her chest with both arms like it was the only warm thing in the world, and maybe it was. And when the lantern light hit her, she didn't flinch, didn't scramble, didn't do any of the things a person does when they're caught. She just looked at me. I'll tell you what stopped me. It wasn't fear in her face. I'd have known what to do with fear. It was the lack of it, a stillness that had gone all the way down past being scared into someplace worse, a place where nothing that happened next could be much different from everything that already had. She looked at me the way you look at weather, as a thing to be endured. "Ma'am," I said because I didn't know what else a man says. "You'll die out here." Her mouth moved. It took her a second to get sound out of it, her lips being near frozen. "I'll move on," she said. "I'm sorry, I'll move on." And she started, God help her, to get up, to gather that bag and haul herself up out of the one sheltered spot in a mile and walk back out into a night that would have killed her before she reached the road. She started to do it because I'd found her, and being found was, to her, the same as being told to leave. She'd had that lesson taught to her enough times that she'd stopped waiting for anyone to say the words out loud. "No," I said, too sharp. She froze. "No, stay put. Don't." I got a hold of my voice. "There's a fire in the house, that's all I meant. There's a fire and it's warm and there's coffee still on. I'm not gonna stand here and freeze to make a point, and neither should you." She didn't move. Not toward the house, not away. She just watched me, calculating, and I understood, later I understood, standing there I only felt it, that she was doing arithmetic, weighing the cold that would surely kill her against the man who might, trying to figure out which unknown was the smaller loss. A woman does that math fast when she's had to do it before. I did the only thing I could think of. I set the lantern down on the frozen ground between us, backed off 3 steps, and put my hands where she could see them. "My name's Elias Corliss," I said. "This is my place. Been mine 20 years, that's my dog Boone, and he's got no teeth to speak of and less sense. I got a spare room, hasn't been slept in since my wife passed. You can bolt the door from the inside. I'll sleep in the barn if it suits you better." I heard myself say it and thought, "Fool, you'll freeze in the barn worse than she will," but I meant it anyhow. "I'm not asking you anything. I'm not owed anything. It's a cold night and I got warm to spare. That's the whole of it." For a long moment she didn't answer. The ice ticked. Boone whined. Then she said, so quiet I nearly missed it, "Why?" And that one word, that was the first thing about her that got in under my ribs and stayed there. Not thank you. Not are you sure. Just why, like kindness was a thing that always came with a bill attached, and she'd learned to read the fine print before she signed. I didn't have a good answer. I've thought about it for 30 years and I still don't. The true one was probably just that I couldn't have gone back inside and shut the door and gone on adding my columns knowing she was out there, and that in the morning I'd have found a shape under the frost and had to write stranger, froze in my book, and I didn't want that line in my ledger. But that's an answer about me, not about her, and it felt cheap. So I said, because my mama would've, and I'd hate to disappoint her this far after she's gone. Something moved in her face then. Not a smile. She wasn't anywhere near a smile, but the first crack in that weathered stillness, like she'd expected any answer but a plain one. She let me help her up. When she stood I saw how thin she'd gone, the coat hanging off her, and how she favored her right foot, and how she kept that carpetbag between us the whole way to the house like a shield. She wouldn't take my arm. Walked the 40 yards on her own on a bad foot over frozen ruts because taking help twice in one night was more than her pride could bear. And I let her, because I understood already, dimly, the way you understand a thing before you have words for it, that the pride was about all she had left standing, and a man doesn't kick the last post out from under a leaning fence. Her name was Margaret. She told me that much at the door and nothing else, and I didn't ask. I gave her the spare room. Sarah's room, my wife's sewing room it had been before, and after she passed I'd shut the door on it and let the dust have it because I couldn't stand to and couldn't stand to clear it out either. There was a bed in there under a sheet. I made it up with the good blankets while Margaret stood in the hall holding her bag, watching my hands, and when I was done I showed her the bolt. "Slides right there," I said, "solid. You throw that and nobody's coming through, me least of all." I set a cup of coffee and a heel of bread and the last of the ham on the little table by the window. "I'll be across the way. You need anything, you holler, but I don't expect you will. Sleep." She looked at the food. She looked at it the way I'd looked at those columns in my ledger, like she was doing math on it, like she was trying to figure the cost. And I saw her decide to wait until I was gone to eat, because eating in front of me would have been one humiliation too many, and I got myself out of that room quick as I could without seeming to hurry, and I pulled the door to behind me. I heard the bolt slide. Good, I thought, that's good. Let her have the one lock in the world she trusts. I lay awake a long time in my own bed listening to the house. Around 2 I heard her moving a floorboard, a chair, the small sounds of a person eating slow to make it last. And then later, a sound I wasn't ready for. She was crying. Not loud. She had it muffled into the pillow probably, the way you cry when you've had a lot of practice crying quiet, when you've learned that grief is a thing to be done privately so as not to trouble anyone. It was the most contained, disciplined weeping I ever heard, and it was worse for that. A person who's learned to cry that carefully has been taught, over and over, that their sorrow is an imposition. I lay there and I did not go to her, because there was nothing I could do and my going would only have shamed her further. But I'll tell you, and I've never told anybody this, I put my own face in my own pillow that night, 41 years old, and I cried too. For her. For Sarah. For the whole cold, indifferent arithmetic of a world that lets people fall through it like water through a sieve. I hadn't cried in 6 years. That woman broke something loose in me the first night, and it never did set back the way it was. In the morning the bolt was still thrown, and I let her sleep. She stayed 3 days before she'd tell me anything, and I let those 3 days be what they were. I didn't crowd her. I've handled skittish stock my whole life, and you don't fix a spooked animal by cornering it. You make yourself boring. You make yourself safe. You go about your business until the creature decides on its own that you're part of the furniture. So I went about my business. I fed the stock and forked the manure and mended what the cold had broken, and I made sure there was food where she could get it without having to ask, and I didn't ask. She came out of that room by degrees. First, just to the kitchen when she thought I was in the barn. Then to the porch, wrapped in one of Sarah's shawls she'd found, and asked me twice if she could borrow, and I said keep it, and she wouldn't. She folded it careful each night and left it on the chair. Then, the third day, out to the barn, where she stood in the doorway a while watching me work and finally said, in a voice rusty from not being used, I could do that. I looked up. She was pointing at the tangle of harness I was trying to sort, leather stiff and cracked, buckles I couldn't get my cold fingers around. It's fiddly work, I said. I have fiddly hands, she said, and there was just barely, just for a second, something dry in it. The ghost of a person who'd once had a sense of humor before whatever happened. So I let her, and she was good, better than good. She took that harness apart and cleaned it and worked neatsfoot oil into the leather with a patience I didn't have, her thin fingers moving sure and quick, and she mended a strap I'd have thrown out. She worked the whole afternoon and didn't say 10 words, and when the light went she'd made that broke-down harness better than it had been in years. Where'd you learn that? I asked. And that was the wrong question, or the right one, because her hands went still and her face closed up, and she said, my husband kept horses. And that was all. She got up and went inside, and I didn't see her the rest of the night. Husband, I wrote nothing in my ledger about it, but I wrote it somewhere. It came out in pieces over the following week. The way these things do, not a confession, never a confession, just fragments that fell out sideways when her guard slipped, that I gathered up and fit together after. There had been a husband. There had been before that a whole life, a good one, a fine house in a town 200 miles east, a place in the world, a pew with her name as good as carved on it. Her husband had been a man of some standing, land, business, respect. And then he died sudden, a fever, gone in a week, and it had come out after in the cold accounting that follows a death, that the standing had been built on sand. Debt under the debt under the debt. The fine house mortgaged twice over. The business hollow. He'd been a proud man who'd kept up appearances long past the point of honesty. And when he died, the appearances died with him, and left her standing in the wreckage holding his name. They took the house. They took the horses she'd learned to tend. They took, One creditor and one cousin and one so-called friend at a time, everything down to the wool coat with the velvet collar, and then they took her welcome, too, because a widow with nothing is an embarrassment to a town that once envied her. The people who'd sat in her parlor crossed the street. The church that had known her name found reasons. And there is a particular cruelty, I came to understand, in falling from a height. Because the higher you were, the more people there are who'd been quietly waiting, and the shame of it, the shame of being pitied by the very people who'd once wanted to be you, that's a thing that can hollow a person right out. She hadn't fallen so much as been pushed, over months, out and out and out, until there was no room left for her anywhere she was known. So she'd done the only thing left. She'd packed the one bag they let her keep, and she'd walked away from being known entirely, headed west, toward a place where nobody had ever heard the name Margaret Ashford, and so nobody could look at her and see how far she'd come down. She'd been 3 months on the road when I found her. 3 months of exactly the thing she'd been fleeing: the doorways, the charity that came with a sermon, the men who saw a woman alone and did their arithmetic, the towns that let you stay a night and made sure you knew it was a night. 3 months of being no one, which was, she discovered, both the thing she wanted and the thing that was killing her. "I keep thinking," she said once. The only time she said much all at once. We were on the porch, and it had warmed just enough that the eaves were dripping, and she was watching the water fall. "I keep thinking about who I used to be, and I can't decide if I miss her or if I hate her. She was so sure of everything. She had opinions about people who had less. She thought it meant something about them." She wiped the drip off the rail with one finger over and over, a small nervous motion. "I was awful, Mr. Corliss, before. I want you to know that about me. I gave a woman a coat once, a poor woman, and I felt so good about it, so charitable, and I never once thought—" She stopped. "I never thought I'd be her, and now I am her, and I understand at last that she probably hated me, for the coat, for how good I got to feel giving it. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been cheap. So that's why," she said, "when you asked why I'd stayed out in the cold rather than knock on your door." She looked at me then, direct, which she rarely did, "because I knew what it would feel like to be given something. And I would rather have frozen than feel that again. I turned that over a long time after. Still do. That a person could reach a place where dying quiet felt cleaner than being helped. That pride, which we're taught is a sin, could be the last thing keeping a soul from dissolving entirely, the last wall of the house standing, and her holding it up with both hands, because if it fell there'd be nothing left that was hers. I never gave her anything again after that, not a gift anyhow. I gave her work, which is a different thing, and I paid her for it in coin out of my ledger, entered plain harness and mending, 40 cents, and she took the coin because coin earned is not the same as charity received, and we both understood that the fiction that she was working for wages was the thing that let her stay. It wasn't a fiction exactly. She earned every cent and more, but we both knew what it was really for. It was a way for me to feed her that let her keep her back straight. It was the only kind of help she could hold. Winter dug in. Christmas came and went. I gave her nothing, and she gave me a pair of wool socks she'd knit from raveled yarn, and I understood that this was allowed, that a gift given was pride and a gift returned was dignity, and I took those socks like they were spun gold, and I wore them till they were holes, and I've still got what's left of them in a drawer. She got stronger. The hunted look came off her by inches. She started sleeping without the bolt. I knew because I stopped hearing it slide, and one morning I came in from the barn and she was singing, just under her breath, some hymn, and she stopped the second she saw me, embarrassed, but she'd been singing, and I carried that around like a warm stone in my pocket all day. We fell into a rhythm, the two of us and the old dog. She had a mind like a steel trap, and she took over my books inside a month, found 3 errors in my figuring that had cost me money for years, and told me about them plainly, no apology, which I respected. She could do sums in her head faster than I could on paper. She'd been raised for a parlor, but there was iron in her, a hard practical competence that her old life had never let her use, And out here, where nobody cared what your name had been, she got to be good at things for the first time maybe ever. I watched her discover that. I watched a woman who'd been taught her whole worth was in being decorative discover that she was, in fact, formidable, and it was like watching a hawk that had been kept in a parlor finally get let at the open sky. I won't pretend I didn't come to feel things. I was a widower and she was Margaret, and she was in my kitchen singing hymns, and a man would have to be made of the fence posts he mends not to feel something. But I kept it packed down tight and I never let it show, because I knew that the moment she thought her staying had a price, even a price as gentle as my hoping, she'd be gone. Down the road, back into the cold, rather than owe me that. Her pride would demand it, so I made myself safe. I made myself furniture. I asked nothing and hoped nothing out loud and just let her be, day after day, warm and fed and useful and unafraid, and I told myself that was enough. And most days I even believed it. And then in the last week of February, a wagon came up the road. I saw it from the north field mid-afternoon, a fine wagon with a fine team, out of place on my rough track. And I saw Margaret, who'd been hanging wash on the line, go absolutely still at the sight of it. Still, the way she'd been that first night behind the barn. That endured weather stillness come back all at once. She knew that wagon. "Margaret," I called, coming down toward the house. "Margaret who?" But she'd already turned to me, and her face, the face that had spent 2 months slowly coming back to life, had gone shut and gray and finished. And she said the thing I'd been dreading without knowing I dreaded it, the thing that ended the good part of that winter and began the part I've spent 30 years trying to earn the right to tell. She said, "It's my husband's brother. And if he's found me, then he's found the rest of it too. Elia's." It was the first time she'd used my given name. "There's something I never told you, about why I ran. It wasn't only the shame." The wagon rolled into the yard. A man climbed down, tall, well-dressed, smiling a smile with no warmth in it at all. "Hello, Margaret," he said. "You've led me a long way." And Boone, old toothless Boone, began to growl. "Afternoon," I said. "I didn't offer my hand. Help you with something." He looked at me the way you'd look at a fence post that had started talking. "I don't believe this concerns you, friend." Then past me, sweet as syrup, "Margaret, you're looking well. Rough living seems to agree with you." She hadn't moved from the wash line. The wet sheet she'd been hanging still hung half-pinned, one corner in the frozen dirt now, and she hadn't noticed. And Margaret was a woman who noticed everything. That told me more than her face did about how far inside herself she'd gone. "How did you find me?" she said. Not a question, flat. "You wrote to Cousin Adelaide." Harlan pulled off one glove, finger by finger, unhurried, "a man who liked to make you wait. In December, a very sad little letter, asking after your mother's brooch, the garnet one, you remember. Adelaide, bless her Christian heart, felt just terrible for you. And Adelaide has never in her life been able to keep a secret from me." He smiled wider. "You should have wanted nothing, Margaret. Wanting things is how they find you." I felt her flinch behind me. Because it was the same lesson she'd already taught me, wanting is how they find you. And here was the man who'd taught it to her the first time, saying it out loud like a proverb, like a thing he was proud of. "Say your piece and get off my land," I said. Harlan turned the full weight of that empty smile on me. "And who might you be to Margaret?" "The man whose land you're standing on." I let that sit. "You got 60 seconds before I stop being polite. 58 now." He held my eye a moment, weighing me the way I'd weighed him, and whatever he decided, he chose the smile again and spread his hands, all reason. "There's no call for that. I've come a very long way to bring my sister-in-law good news. Family news." He looked at her. "It concerns the estate, Margaret." "My brother's estate. There have been developments. It would be better discussed indoors, privately." "Anything you got to say, you say it here," I said. And Margaret, quiet from behind me. "No, Elia's let him in. I need to hear it." A pause. "I need to know how much he knows." That last part she said low for me. And that was the first cold finger of dread down my spine, because how much he knows meant there was something to know, something past the shame and the debt and the fine house lost, something she'd carried in that carpetbag along with the garnet brooch and the church-going coat. Something she'd never told me, and I'd thought I'd earned all her secrets by then. That's a vanity I've learned. You never earn all of anybody. We sat at my kitchen table, the one where I did my columns. Harlan looked around my house the way a man appraises a horse he's not going to buy, and Boone lay across the doorway with his hackles up and a low, idle growl running under everything like a creek under ice. And I stood by the stove with my arms folded, because I wasn't about to sit and be sociable. My brother, Harlan began, died 2 years ago owing a great deal of money. This much you know. The house, the horses, the accounts, all of it went to the creditors, and what the creditors didn't take, the family reclaimed as was our right. He said as was our right, like a man laying down a winning card. You were left with nothing. Also, as you know, very sad, very unfortunate. Get to it, I said. What Margaret perhaps does not know, he turned that smile on her again, is that a claim has surfaced. Land. Some acreage my brother purchased years ago out west that never appeared in the estate accounting because he purchased it under a different arrangement. He steepled his fingers. It turns out to be worth a considerable sum. There's a railroad interested, and the deed, Margaret, was made out not to my brother. A pause precisely timed. It was made out to you. The stove ticked. The dog growled. Outside a crow said something and quit. Margaret didn't move. Why would Thomas do that? To hide it, of course, from his creditors. A man expecting trouble puts his one clean asset in his wife's name where the debts can't reach. Very clever. Very like him. Harlan's smile thinned. The trouble is he died before he could put it back, and so now the one thing of value my brother left in this world belongs legally to you. He let that hang, which is why I've come, to help you claim it. To manage it naturally, the law and the railroad men, it's no business for a woman alone. I'll need only your signature, on a few papers, assigning me power of attorney over the matter so that I might act in your interest. I'd been in enough land deals to smell it. So that you might act in your interest, I said. You want her to sign that land over to you. I want, Harlan said, with the first real edge coming into his voice, what belongs to my family. That land was my brother's. It is Ashford land. It has no business belonging to a woman who was an Ashford for 6 years and has spent 2 years dragging our name through every poorhouse and cattle town between here and there. He looked at Margaret, and now the smile was gone entirely, and I saw the thing underneath it, which was not greed exactly. It was grievance, the deep sour grievance of a man who believes the world owes him and has kept it from him. You will sign, Margaret. Because if you do not, I will be forced to explain to the railroad men, and to the sheriff, and to anyone else who will listen, exactly why my brother felt he needed to hide his assets from you in the first place. I will tell them what you did. And there it was, the thing in the bag. Margaret had gone the color of ash. Her hands were flat on my table, pressed down, and I could see they wanted to shake, and she wouldn't let them. What she did, I said slowly, and what's that? Harlan opened his mouth, savoring it. Thomas beat me, Margaret said. She said it to the table, quiet, but it went off in that little kitchen like a shot. For 6 years, she said, he beat me. Carefully, he was a careful man where the dress is covered. My arms, my back, her voice caught and she made it go on. The town that envied me, the pew with my name, all of it, and every night I locked a door that he had the key to, and I learned to cry so quiet no one would ever have to be troubled by it. She looked up and nodded Harlan at me. You heard me, the first night. You heard me crying so quiet. I've had years of practice, Elias. That's where I learned it. I couldn't speak, the stove ticked. And the night he died, Margaret went on, steady now, terribly steady, like a woman walking across ice who knows the only way is to keep going. The night the fever took him, he was sick 3 days, and on the 3rd day he was very weak and he wanted water. And he called for me, and I stood in the doorway of that room with a cup of water in my hand. She stopped. Her jaw worked. And I did not give it to him. I stood there, and I watched him ask. And I let the cup go cold in my hand, and I did not move, and I did not call the doctor back, and in the morning he was gone. A long breath. So you see, I didn't only fail to save him. There's an argument, Harlan's argument, that I let him die, that I chose it. And out here, a woman who let her husband die, whatever he did to her, she spread her hands. They hang women for less, or they might. It would depend entirely on who told the story. The kitchen was very quiet. Harlan recovered first. He always would. You see the position, he said to me, almost gently, as if we were two reasonable men and Margaret a problem between us. She can sign the land to me and walk away a free woman with her ugly secret kept, or she can keep the land, and I will make certain that everyone from here to the county seat knows precisely what kind of woman took a stranger's charity behind his feed barn. A murderess. I imagine that will color your neighbor's view of your household somewhat. He stood, brushed his trousers. I'll take a room in town tonight, the Drovers. I'll expect you tomorrow, Margaret, with your signature. Bring your Christian conscience, or don't. It makes no difference to me which. He put his glove back on, finger by finger, unhurried. Good afternoon. Boone did not move from the doorway. Harlan looked down at the old dog, and the old dog looked up at him, toothless and unafraid, and something in Harlan didn't care to test it. He stepped over him. The fine wagon turned in my yard and rolled back down my rough track and was gone, and the dust of it hung gold in the low sun. And inside my kitchen, a woman sat with her hands flat on my table waiting for me to decide what she was. I want to tell you I went to her right away. I want to tell you I was equal to that moment. But I've sworn to tell this straight, and the truth is I stood by that stove a long moment and I felt the whole thing land on me. She watched him die, and some low, mean animal part of me, the part raised on Sunday sermons about thou shalt not, reared up and said a word I'm ashamed of. It only lasted a second, but it was there. I'd have to be a liar to leave it out. And then it passed, the way a shadow passes. And what was left underneath it was so simple and so total that I've built the rest of my life on the foundation of it. I thought about the crying in the night, the disciplined, muffled, years-practiced weeping of a woman who'd learned that her pain was an imposition. I thought about the bolt she threw on the inside of a door, and how I'd been glad she had one lock in the world she trusted, and I understood now what all the locks in her life had been for, and who'd held the keys. I thought about a cup of water going cold in a shaking hand, while a man who'd spent 6 years making a careful study of her body's hidden places asked her, one last time, to serve him. And I found I could not condemn her. I turned it every way I knew, and I could not find the place to stand from which I'd have condemned her. Maybe a better man could. I've met men since who told me they could, told me right and wrong don't bend for circumstance. And I've noticed those men are mostly ones who have never had to stand in a doorway holding a cup. It's easy to know exactly what you do until you're the one holding it. I crossed the kitchen and I sat down across from her at my own table, in my own chair where I did my columns, and I put my rough hands out flat on the wood the same way hers were. So we were two people with our hands on a table, and I said the only thing I had. That cup, I said, the one you didn't give him. She flinched, waiting for the verdict. You've been carrying it 2 years, haven't you? That's the real weight in that bag. I looked at her. You can set it down now, not because what happened was nothing. Because you've carried it far enough, and a person's allowed to set a thing down when they've carried it far enough, and I'll help you carry whatever's left. She looked at me like she didn't understand the words, like I was speaking a language she used to know and had forgotten. And then her face, that face that had spent that first night looking at me like I was weather, that had spent 2 years shut against a world that had every reason to be shut against, her face came apart. All at once. Years of it. She put her head down on my kitchen table and she cried, and it was not the quiet, disciplined crying of the first night. It was loud. It was ugly and loud and heaving and unprivate, the crying of a person who has, for the first time in longer than she could remember, decided that her grief was allowed to trouble somebody, that she was allowed to take up that much room in the world. And I sat there and I let her take up the room. I didn't touch her. I didn't hush her. I just kept my hands flat on the table so she'd know I was staying, and I let her cry the whole cup out onto my kitchen boards, and Boone came over and put his gray muzzle on her knee, and the sun went down while she did it, and I didn't light the lamp. Some things a person should get to do in the dark. When she was done, truly done, wrung out quiet, we sat in the dark a while. Then she said in a voice scraped raw, "He'll ruin you too, if I stay. You understand that? Harlan will tell the whole county that Elias Corliss took a murderess into his dead wife's room. Whatever he can't prove he'll imply, and implications enough out here. You'll lose your standing, your neighbors, maybe worse." She lifted her head. "The kind thing, the decent thing is for me to be gone before morning. To go to town, sign his papers, take my secret and go west and let you keep your good name. That's the arithmetic, Elias. I've done it. I'm good at arithmetic. It comes out the same every way I add it. I go, and you're safe, and Harlan gets his railroad money, and the world goes on." "That's one way to add it," I said. "It's the only way that keeps you out of it." "Then I don't much like your columns." I got up and lit the lamp after all, because what I had to say I wanted to say in light. "Margaret, that land is yours. Thomas put it in your name to hide it, but the law's the law. It's yours, not Harlan's. Yours, bought, near as I can figure, with years you spent locked in a room learning to cry quiet. If any human soul on this earth earned a piece of ground, it's you, and I'll be damned before I sit here and help you hand it to the man who's using your own beating against you to steal it." I set the lamp down hard enough to make the flame jump. "You want to talk arithmetic? Fine. Let's do the whole ledger, not just your half." She stared at me. "Harlan's got a threat," I said. "That's all he's got. A threat only works if the thing threatened is a secret, so we take away the secret. We tell it first, our way. Tell it you can't just they'll. There's a circuit judge comes through the county seat come the thaw. Fair man, from what I hear, took a bribe once from a cattle baron and gave it to the man's own hands wrapped around a rock, the story goes. That got the very smallest twitch out of her, which I was glad of. We go to him, not to hide from the law, to the law, before Harlan can. You tell it plain, everything, the beatings and the cup and all of it, on your own terms, in your own words, to the one man out here whose job it is to weigh a thing fair. You take Harlan's secret and you spend it before he can. A secret you tell yourself has no power left in it. And a man who's been beating his threat like a drum's got nothing to beat when the drum's already been played. And if the judge hangs me..." I didn't flinch from it. She deserved that I not flinch. "Then he hangs you having heard the whole truth, and I'll be standing next to you the whole while, and we'll neither of us have spent our last free days lying and running and letting a snake like Harlan Ashford own us." I sat back down. "But he won't. I've been out here 20 years, Margaret. I know how these things weigh when a woman finally gets to tell them. And I think you've spent so long believing your pain was an imposition that you can't yet imagine a room where somebody hears it and lands on your side. But those rooms exist. This kitchen's one. I'm betting the judge's is another." I paused. "It's a bet with your neck. I won't pretend it's not. So it's yours to make, not mine. But I'll make it with you if you'll have me. That's the only part I get to decide." She was quiet a long, long time. The lamp hissed. Boone sighed and shifted. And I watched the arithmetic change behind her eyes. I watched her, for the first time maybe in her whole life, add a column she'd never been allowed to add, the column where somebody else was on her side of the ledger, where the sum wasn't hers to bear alone. It was a foreign kind of math to her, and I could see her checking it and rechecking it, not trusting it, sure she'd made an error somewhere, and finding each time that the numbers held. "Why," she said finally. The same word as the first night, but it landed different now, softer, less like reading fine print and more like real wonder. "Why would you?" "Because your mom'd have wanted somebody to," I said. "Same as mine, that's the whole of it still." She didn't answer that night. She went to Sarah's room and I heard the door but not the bolt, and I lay awake as I had that first night, listening. No crying this time. just the small sounds of a person lying awake thinking, which I knew because I was doing the same across the hall. In the morning I got up before light to feed the stock and found her already in the kitchen, dressed, the lamp lit, my ledger open in front of her and a pencil in her hand. She'd been going through my accounts, my whole 2 years of columns, and she'd made a fresh sheet, neat as a printed page, and at the top in her fine copperplate hand she'd written the date, and under it a heading, and the heading was our 2 names together, hers and mine, like a partnership recorded. "If we're going to bet my neck," she said, not looking up, her voice steady and dry and more herself than I'd ever heard it, "we're going to do it with the books in order. You've been carrying a $4 error since last March. Sit down." And Elia's now she looked up, and there was something new in her face, something that had not been there yesterday or any day before, something I can only call decision. "We're not signing anything of Harlan's. We're going to the judge. I've done the arithmetic all night." A breath. "It comes out different when you let someone else hold the other end." Outside, the first gray was coming up over the north field, and somewhere down the road in the drover's hotel, a man in town boots was sleeping easy, certain he'd already won. He hadn't reckoned on the arithmetic changing. He hadn't reckoned on a woman who'd learned, at last, that she was allowed to take up room. And he surely hadn't reckoned that the widow he'd come to squeeze had spent the night doing the one thing that would undo him entirely, deciding to stop being ashamed. She slid the pencil across the table to me. $4, she said. "March. Find it." His name was Amos Whitfield, and he held court in the back of the feed store at the county seat because the county seat didn't run to a courthouse yet, and he was old, older than I'd expected, with white whiskers and a stillness to him and eyes that had been reading men across a table for 40 years, and had stopped being surprised by any of them. I'd worried he'd be one of those bought or bored or in a hurry to get to the next town. He wasn't any of the 3. He was just old and tired and fair, which is about the best a person can hope for out of the law, then or now. Harlan got there first, of course he did. He'd had 3 weeks to sit in the drovers growing certain, 3 weeks of sending word up to my place, notes I didn't answer, a lawyer's letter Margaret read once and set in the stove, 3 weeks convinced that the widow's Christian conscience would fold like it always had, that she'd come crawling to sign, and when instead we came to him, to the judge in the open, with the whole thing laid out to be told, I watched him not understand it. I watched him sit there in his town clothes among the feed sacks and the smell of grain, dust, and molasses, and not understand, for the first time maybe in his life, what game was being played. Because Harlan Ashford only knew how to play the one game, the secret game, the game where he holds a thing over you in the dark and squeezes. He'd never once in his life had to play a hand face-up, and he didn't know how, and I saw the exact moment he realized he'd have to. Margaret told it. I'd offered to speak for her, some fool chivalrous notion, and she'd looked at me across my kitchen table the night before and said, "No, Elias. He took my telling from me for 6 years. Every night he decided what happened and I locked the door on it. I'm not handing my telling to you now, however kind. It's mine. It's the one thing I've got that's fully mine." And she was right, and I shut up about it. And the next morning she stood in the back of that feed store in her mended church coat with the bald velvet collar, and she told a room full of strangers the thing she'd learned to cry quiet about. She told it plain. No weeping. She'd done her weeping on my kitchen boards where it belonged, and what was left was straight and level and terrible in its plainness. She told about the 6 years and the careful bruises under the dresses. She told about the town that envied her and the pew with her name. She told about the debts under the debts, and the fine house lost, and the 2 years walking west being no one. And then, I watched the whole room go still. I watched the judge's tired eyes come up off his hands and fix on her. She told about the cup. She didn't soften it. That was the thing that undid Harlan, I think. He'd been sitting there with his one card, his she let him die, waiting to play it like a trump, and she reached over and played it for him, first herself in her own words, and took every ounce of shock value out of it by owning it before he could accuse it. "I stood in the doorway with the water," she told the judge, "and he asked and I did not bring it. I want that written down exactly. I did not bring the water. I do not know to this day whether it would have saved him. The fever had him. The doctor said after there was likely nothing to be done. But I know I did not try, and I know why I did not try, and I have carried the weight of that choice for 2 years, and I am done carrying it in the dark. Whatever the law makes of me, I would rather it make of me in the light." The feed store was silent. Somewhere a barn cat walked along a shelf. And then Harlan, because he couldn't help it, because it was the only game he had, Harlan stood up and started to make it into the thing he needed it to be. "You hear it, Judge, from her own mouth. A confession, plain. She murdered my brother. She let him die and took his land, and she's led this rancher by the nose to shelter her. And I say—" "Sit down," said Judge Whitfield. He didn't say it loud. He said it the way you tell a dog to get off the furniture, tired, certain, and Harlan sat down like his strings were cut, and I don't think he even knew he'd done it until he was down. The judge looked at Margaret a long while. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I've been 40 years at this. I have listened to a great many people tell me a great many things across a great many tables, and I have gotten fair good at telling the ones who are performing from the ones who are not. You are not performing." He laced his old fingers together. "Let me ask you something, and think before you answer it, because it matters more than the rest. In the 2 years since, have you slept?" Margaret blinked. "Sir." "Have you slept, at night, since it happened?" The old eyes didn't move off her. "The ones who did a murder, ma'am, the cold ones, the ones who chose it clean, they sleep just fine. It's the ones who couldn't do a thing and hate themselves for the couldn't, or the ones who did a thing in a corner they were driven into and can't forgive themselves the corner, those are the ones don't sleep. So, have you slept?" And Margaret quiet. "No, sir, not through a night, not in 2 years." "No," said the judge, "I didn't expect you had." He unlaced his fingers. "Here is my finding, and I'll say it once, and I'll say it for the whole room so there's no telling it different after." He looked around, and his tired eyes landed hardest on Harlan. "A woman held 6 years in a locked house by a man who beat her careful is not a free agent in the hour of that man's dying. The law knows the word duress, and I have never in 40 years seen a plainer case of it than a woman so worn down by cruelty that in her 1 hour of power she could not raise her hand to help the man who'd spent 6 years teaching her that her hands were nothing. She did not poison him. She did not smother him. The fever killed him, by the doctor's own words set down at the time. She failed to fetch water. I will not hang a woman, I will not so much as charge a woman, for the crime of being too broken by another's hand to save the one who broke her. That is not murder. That is the wound talking, and I have got no gallows for a wound." I heard Margaret make a small sound. I did not look at her, because looking would have been taking, and this was hers. "As to the land," Judge Whitfield went on, and now he turned the full weight of 40 tired years onto Harlan Ashford, "the deed is in her name. Lawful, recorded. I've seen the paper. It's hers, whatever the intent behind the putting of it there. And any man who comes into my court trying to frighten a widow out of her lawful deed, by beating a drum about her worst hour—" He leaned forward. "That man had best have clean hands his own self, Mr. Ashford, because I find I've grown curious about the debts that ate your brother's estate, and about who exactly stood to gain from the eating, and I've got a clerk and a long afternoon and a powerful itch to be curious out loud. Would you care for me to be curious out loud?" Harlan Ashford did not care for it. I have thought many times since about how fast it went at the end. 3 weeks he'd sat in the drovers, certain. 6 years he'd watched his brother build a cruelty into a marriage and said nothing, gained by it. 2 years he'd chased a broken woman across half the West to squeeze the one clean thing out of her hands. And it all came down in about 90 seconds, in the back of a feed store that smelled of molasses, because a tired old man asked whether she'd slept and didn't like the shape of the debts. Harlan gathered his town coat and his town boots and what was left of his composure, and he left. And he did not look at Margaret, and I never in my life saw him again, and neither did she. Some men, when the one game they know stops working, they just stop. There wasn't anything underneath the game. That was the whole of Harlan Ashford. There was nothing under the coat. We didn't talk much on the ride home. It was a long ride, and the thaw had turned the track to mud, and the wagon fought it the whole way, and Margaret sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned to the passing country, and I let the silence be. Some silences you fill and some you don't, and a person learns the difference or they don't learn much. It was near dark when we came up the last rise, and the place came into view, my place, the barn and the house, and the crooked line of fence I was always meaning to fix, and Boone a gray smudge on the porch lifting his old head at the sound of us, and the crocuses purple in the last light along the wall. Margaret looked at it a while, then she said, "It doesn't feel real, not being afraid. I keep waiting for it to, for someone to come take it back." A small breath. "Is that how it is? Does it just stop one day, the being afraid, or do you carry that too forever in a smaller bag?" "Smaller bag, I think," I said, because I wouldn't lie to her, not even to be kind. "You carry it, but it gets smaller, and you get bigger around it. That's about the best I know." She nodded slow. That seemed to satisfy her more than a comfort would have. She'd never had much use for comforts. She had use for the truth, which was maybe the rarest thing anyone had ever offered her, and the cheapest for me to give. And I've thought since that's the whole secret of it, the whole reason it worked, the two of us, that I never once tried to give her more than the truth, and she'd spent her whole life starving for exactly and only that. We pulled into the yard. I saw to the team. She went in and lit the lamp, and through the window I watched her move around my kitchen, our kitchen. I'd started to think, though I hadn't dared say it, putting things right, and I stood in the cold mud a minute just watching the warm square of light with her inside it, and I thought about the first night, the shape of her wedged into the angle of the barn behind me, clutching a bag, looking at me like I was weather. And I thought about how close it had come to being a line in my ledger. Stranger froze. How close, how thin the margin is always between the people we save and the ones we only find in the morning. I didn't go in right away. I went instead around the back to the feed barn, to that angle where the barn meets the lean-to where I'd found her. I don't know why. I just wanted to stand in the spot. It was just a corner, just boards and cold ground and a little pocket of animal warmth leaking through, the same as any barn corner anywhere. Nothing special about it. And that was the thing that got me standing there, that it was nothing special, just a random cold corner of a random cold ranch, and that if she'd wedged herself into some other corner 60 miles off, some corner with no house behind it, or with a worse man in the house, she'd have been the morning shape, the frozen line, and no one would ever have known the name Margaret Ashford or the 6 years or the cup or any of it. It would have gone into the ground with her, and the world would have added its columns and come out even. The margin so thin. That's what I learned that winter, and I've never unlearned it. We tell ourselves the good ones get saved and the world sorts itself fair, and it doesn't, it's just corners and cold and who happens to have a dog that won't quit barking. I got Margaret by luck, by an old dog's stubbornness and a random 40 yards. And every good year I had after, and there were a great many, more than I deserved. Every one of them turned on that thin thread that Boone barked, that I got up out of a warm chair, that she'd picked the corner behind my barn. I went in, she had coffee on. She'd found my ledger and moved it to the good light and was already, God love her, hunting the $4 error which she'd never let go of, and would not let go of for the rest of both our lives, and would find eventually and would be insufferable about, and I would love her for it. I didn't say any of the big things that night. Neither did she. The big things between us mostly went unsaid, always did. We were neither of us built for speeches, and we'd both been given too much practice at the cost of saying tender things out loud. But she poured me coffee, and I sat down at the table across from her in the lamplight, and she slid a pencil over, and it was the same as the morning before the judge. And it was different because now there was nothing hanging over it, nothing coming up the road, just two people and a ledger and a fixed error somewhere in the columns of a hard year, and all the time in the world to find it. March, she said. It's in March. I know it's in March. You said April yesterday. I did not say April. She did not look up, but the corner of her mouth, the corner that had been dead as a stone the night I found her, the corner that shame had pressed flat for years, the corner of her mouth moved, just barely, just for a second. The ghost of the woman who'd once had a sense of humor, come all the way back and made solid, sitting at my table hunting my $4 in the warm lamplight while the thaw ran in the north draw, and the crocuses stood up purple in the dark. March, she said again, softer. And I said, all right, March. And I picked up my own pencil, and we started down the columns together. And outside the window the last of the winter was letting go of the world one drip at a time, and Boone sighed on the porch, and neither of us said the thing we both